Leading with Integrity and Moral Purpose by Kayla Mitchell, Maya Boodoo, and Harmony Applewhite. Hi class, today we are going to focus on leading with integrity and moral purpose. First, I'll give a scenario and I want you to let me know what would be done in these situations. Let's say you are in charge of the elections committee in your organization. The law states that all officers must have a minimum GPA at the time they are elected, and candidates are required to sign a statement verifying that they have good enough grades to be eligible for office. But these statements are never verified after being signed. Your best friend is running and signed the form despite their GPA being lower than the required minimum. This has also been done in the past by other candidates, making the law a joke. Would you A. allow this to happen because they're your best friend and it has been done multiple times before? Or B. hold your best friend and the other people involved accountable? So for this one, you could just raise your hands. So who would do A? And like you could be honest, which one y'all know y'all would do? Those for A. You could go ahead and raise your hands. I'm not really seeing anybody. So I guess you're not gonna do A. And you would do B? Okay. Okay, I seen everybody saying they would do B. Anybody wanna tell me why they would do B though? Like why y'all would choose to do B?
I just think doing A would be wrong because, if you're trying to involve yourself in something as important as law enforcement, you should at least be honest about it. You shouldn't, be like, oh, well, since it happens before, let me just do it because it happened before. You should at least strive to keep the standard, as high as it should be.
Yeah, that's correct.
May may I answer as well?
Sure.
So I think that, beginning this way kind of affects the culture of the organization eventually because
Mhm.
the supposed laws that supposed to guide the organization is not really being applied the way it should be. So if anybody can do anything, it's not fair, first of all, to those who are trying to apply to go by the law. But then when they see that it's not really being held, they will do whatever they want. Everybody will start to do what they want, and the culture wouldn't really have stability. Everybody, you know, will think that they could do the wrong thing and get away.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
yes, so that's what I.
Okay, thank you. You brought up a very important point. We could move on to the next slide now. These situations are called ethical dilemmas, and usually we react quickly to resolve them or avoid them altogether. This leads to decisions being made without proper ethical consideration. So if you caught your best friend in the act of signing a document stating their grades is good enough to be in office while it isn't, and you quickly make the choice not to confront them or hold them accountable, that is an example of a decision being made without proper ethical consideration. What problems do you think could arise from the lack of ethical consideration in this situation? And well, Camille and Akila brought up some. I don't know if anybody have anything extra to say that they would have thought that wasn't mentioned. Anybody have anything else? Okay.
Not really, though.
Okay. Other reasons for lack of ethical consideration are the attention we put on winning at all costs, feeling the need to please others and avoid conflict, and wanting to protect the company's reputation. Despite these desires, it is important to reflect on ethical and moral aspects of decisions, which means giving yourself and others the time needed to work through complex problems. For the rest of our presentation, we will discuss the creation and maintenance of an ethical organizational environment, an analysis of the moral dimensions of transforming leadership theory, and an examination of the ethical influences that participants have on their organizations through behavior modeling.
Creating and sustaining an ethical organizational environment. To create an ethical workplace, it's essential to apply ethical theories, follow organizational values or codes of conduct, and understand both your moral development and that of your colleagues. This builds a culture of ethics. Nash 1990 identifies four key qualities that help improve ethical standards in organizations: critical thinking to analyze and communicate ethical issues, integrity to stand by and uphold your personal and professional ethical values, empathy to understand things from others' perspectives, and motivation to drive ethical decision making. When applying ethical decision making models, expect potential challenges like criticism, dissent, or even a decline in membership. Not everyone in an organization will prioritize ethics, and some may choose easier or cheaper paths. That's why it's crucial for leaders to make the right decision for an organization, even when facing resistance. Leaders must clearly communicate the issue and their reasoning to others by embodying moral characteristics in actions. Leaders help build an ethical organizational environment. Involving others in decision making reinforces this. Creating and maintaining an ethical environment should be deliberate, following the relational leadership model and the principles of knowing, being, and doing. Ethical organizations require that all members, not just leaders, have equal authority to promote moral behavior. The group's shared core values should guide decisions and behavior. When everyone takes accountability, the ethical environment improves. Relying on a single leader to manage ethics can be counterproductive. The Enron scandal is a textbook example of poor leadership and ethics. Enron, once a major energy company, failed in the early 2000s as a result of corporate fraud and corruption. Despite a 64 code page of ethics, the company's board ignored serious conflicts of interest and tolerated unethical behavior. This resulted in bankruptcy and became one of history's largest corporate scandals. It emphasizes how poor leadership, whether through ineffectiveness or unethical behavior, can destroy an organization. Toxic leaders are those whose destructive behaviors and dysfunctional traits cause long-term harm to their followers and organizations. Example of toxic behaviors can include leaving followers worse off than when they found them, violating human rights, manipulating followers to increase power, feeding fears, spreading lies, pursuing personal worry over followers' well-being, having an inflated ego, disregarding the consequences of their actions, and avoiding tough decisions. Sometimes, even followers can influence or support these toxic behaviors. Organizations can promote ethical behavior by rewarding members who take risks to do the right thing, as this reinforces acceptable actions and values. Unethical behavior should be addressed differently than ethical behavior. While public humiliation was once used to punish ethical violations, the practice is no longer endorsed. Instead, all members bear the responsibility of holding individuals accountable for violations. It is critical to uphold the principle of doing no harm, which includes protecting the individual's confidentiality and ensuring proper procedures when dealing with violations of rules or guidelines. Ethical leadership is critical. Leaders must follow a moral code, as unethical behavior harms both the leader and their followers. While not all organizations follow ethical practices, those that do frequently succeed in the long run. Unfortunately, some organizations reward unethical behavior, such as engaging in dishonest practices to increase membership. Such environments encourage shortcuts, poor performance, and a lack of accountability. For example, the Enron scandal that was mentioned before led to the company's collapse because of unethical leadership. And similarly, Martha Stewart faced prison for insider trading, damaging her reputation, and Ken Lay of Enron was convicted of fraud before his death. Leaders with integrity have a positive impact on their organizations, and when leaders' values conflict with unethical organizational standards, they must make decisions such as ignoring the problem, working to change the environment, or just leave. Which is why ethical fitness is so important. It means being mentally engaged, thinking about the dilemma you are facing, reasoning through it, and grappling with the tough issues.
Moral purpose as an act of courage. Despite the fear of losing your job or position, or the fear of being disliked, we should always practice integrity. An example of this was when Sharon Watkins, a former executive at a company called Enron, displayed courage and integrity when she exposed breaches of conduct by her boss. In an interview, she said her efforts were symbolizing that individual actions matter and that you have to take ownership for your actions when you are in a position of leadership. Simply put, when working in a company, despite the risk of losing your job, wanting to protect the company's image, or knowing that people at the company do bad things all the time and get away with it, you must always have a mind of your own, be aware of your actions, and stand up for the right thing. We need to pay more attention to leaders who are ethical and model good leadership because we often look for national and historical figures while there are leaders all around us. Example, local business leaders, religious leaders, committed citizens of a neighborhood organization, your peers, just to name a few. These people often work in silence and with humility to help others. Kiddo 2005 said that courage is the quality of mind and spirit that enables one to face up to ethical challenges firmly and confidently, without flinching or retreating. Moral courage is the intersection of three conceptual fields: principles, danger, and endurance. Being aware of danger is an important part of moral courage. There should be a willingness to endure hardship, whether it be losing a friend or job. An example of this is when Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 18 years for his opposition to apartheid in South Africa. He knew there would be consequences, but despite that, he fought for the right thing. The opposite of practicing moral courage is doing or saying nothing when faced with ethical dilemmas. Upholding principles and implementing them allows leaders to operate with moral courage. And this is just a quote from Nelson Mandela. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Assumptions about ethical leadership. There are many myths and misunderstandings about good leadership. Leadership that is both ethical and effective. Suella, 1995. Lucas Ananello, 1995, proposed 8 assumptions about ethical leadership. Ethics is the heart of leadership. It is a central issue in leadership. Sewella, 1995. There can't be a full discussion on leadership without including its ethical components. Good leadership is leadership that is effective and follows a sound ethical process. The means justify the ends when leading with integrity. All leadership is value driven. Leadership needs to be reframed so that it represents values that show good ethical leadership. Participants and leaders bring their own values and beliefs about how people should be treated, notions of what is right versus wrong, and ideas on what is fair to the organization. Organizations and communities are value driven, not value neutral. Personal values intersect with organizational values. Ethical leadership starts with assessing personal values and ongoing reflection of personal core values and how they are related to values of an organization or community. Your moral compass will guide you through ethical dilemmas and point you in the direction of making decisions based on ethical assessment, considering of viewpoints, your personal values, and the values of your organization. Ethical leadership can be learned. Ethical learning is the process including experience, reflection, conceptualization, and application. Trial and error experiences may enhance your ethical analysis as well as your reflection about notions of what is fair in situations. You can learn this before acting or making a decision. Your life experiences will continue to affect your development as an ethical leader. Ethical leadership involves a connection between ethical thought and action. Linking moral reasoning with values and actions is important in leadership. This chapter is not to make you lead with integrity and moral purpose and memorize dozens of ethical theories. Rather, engage you in ethical analysis and insights based on theories and concepts applied to real life experiences. Character development is an essential ingredient of ethical leadership. A leader's character is defined by their actions and behaviors, not by the values they support. Leaders can be popular but not respected by the public due to their lack of consistency between their actions and values. Simply put, they don't walk their talk. Ethical leadership is a shared process. Members at all levels of an organization have the opportunity and the responsibility to participate in exercising ethical leadership. It's a shared process, not just the responsibility of a positional leader. Everyone shares the responsibility of advancing core organizational values and doing the right thing. Often, members are asked to be courageous and advocate what's right, despite risk like losing a job or alienating friends. Empowering organizations include members in assessing ethical dilemmas and seek their advice for resolution of problems. Everything we do teaches. Role modeling is a powerful way to influence the ethical climate in families, organizations, and communities. We learn by watching others and making judgments on what is acceptable and unacceptable. For example, if any member, inclusive of the leader, routinely discriminates against students in the membership recruitment process, others in the organization may believe it is okay to exclude students of color in extending invitations to join the group. However, if a leader values diversity and decides to increase the number of minorities on her senior staff by 50%, then other managers of the company will most likely follow her strategy. Leading with moral purpose calls for examination of your assumptions about the following. What is ethical and unethical? Bad leadership versus good leadership. Toxic behaviors versus non toxic behaviors. How far are you willing to go to advance your core values and do the right thing? What are you willing to risk to achieve the values of justice and fairness? And how will you wrestle with an inconsistency between your values and the values of your organization? The goal is not to get an easy answer and quick fixes, but to engage in an ethical analysis and use your moral imagination in solving dilemmas.
Cultural assumption. Ethics occur within a specific cultural context and are either specific to or limited to it. There is no agreement on actions and conduct that are considered right, wrong, moral, or ethical across cultural boundaries. Deliberate discrimination and oppression against women, for example, is considered morally, ethically, and legally permissible in Saudi Arabia, but immoral, criminal, and unethical in the United States. It is also the case that ethics are cyclical, especially when considering how laws and legal norms are changing. There was a time when many believed that having separate restrooms and water fountains for blacks and whites was both morally right and lawful. Still, it is considered illegal, immoral, and unethical these days. Laws affect the development of morality and behavior. Some believe that moral principles are universal. Kidder, 2005, Konongo, and Mendoka, 1996, argue that morally good acts are based on universal laws reflecting truth, goodness, courage, and justice. Even though cultures may apply them differently, Kidder, 2005, identified that 8 shared values in interviews with leaders from 16 different countries: love, truthfulness, justice, freedom, togetherness, tolerance, responsibility, and respect for life. Seligman in 2002 also found 6 core qualities common across over 200 religious and philosophical traditions: knowledge and wisdom, bravery, temperance, love and humanity, justice and spirituality. A culture's belief and attitude shapes its concept of justice and morality. Comparing moral ideas across cultures is futile, for example. Some American women view the Muslim veil as sexist. Though it reflects cultural norms, this highlights the lack of moral consensus in global politics. As individuals from different countries hold diverse ethics, cultural tolerance acknowledges these differences without imposing or altering them. Cultural relativism applies to specific societies, aiming to understand practices rather than judge them. Leaders of multinational businesses must respect the local norms and laws where they are conducting their business. Ethical theories and moral purposes. Let's delve into ethical theories and moral purposes, a field of study that explores human behavior in relation to ethics and ethical development. This study has roots tracing back to ancient philosophers such as Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, as well as to more recent scholars like Immanuel Kant and John Stuart Mill from the 18th and 19th centuries. Ethical theories give us insight into how human judgments are formed and the cognitive processes individuals use to address ethical dilemmas and other complex problems. These theories help explain how people make moral decisions, offering frameworks for understanding ethical choices. In the next section, transforming leadership theory will be highlighted as a leading theory that incorporates morality as a foundational component of leadership. Transforming leadership theory. James McGregor Breen's transforming leadership theory includes a strong component of ethics and morals. Transforming leadership is a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. This type of leadership reaches moral dimensions when leaders and participants' behavior and ethical aspirations are elevated through mutual influence. Transforming leadership involves persuasion, a desire for change, and multidirectional influence, relationships between leaders and participants. In any leadership situation, participants can and often do influence the leader with values like peace, justice, fairness, liberty, and equal opportunity. And also, the general welfare of people are emphasized by transformational leaders. Bruins refer to these values as end values. These values are shaped by leaders, superiors, participants, peers, followers, and others through specific behaviors. The leader's fundamental act is to induce people to be aware or conscious of what they feel, to their true needs so strongly, to define their values so meaningfully, so that they can move to purposeful action. At the core of transforming leadership theory is the relationship and influence between leaders and followers. Burns in 1978 described this relationship as an interaction of power and shared values. It is the power of a person to become a leader, armed with principles and rising above self-interest narrowly, conceived that invests that person with power and may ultimately transform both leaders and followers into persons who jointly adhere to moral values and end values. Shared moral purposes of both leaders and participants are the key factors driving this process, and change is the result of these shared moral purposes. Lauren Binkley, president of the Student Alumni Associates at the University of Tennessee, shares her perspective on core and ethical values in leadership. Some of the core ethical values by which I live and lead are to be honest, to be fair, and to be kind. Honesty is always important. If people cannot trust you, they will not respect you. Fairness is also important. If you treat everyone in the same way, you will rarely face interpersonal problems in your organizations or groups. Kindness is a third value. While it is important to be firm, it is also important to lead with your heart. According to Tische and Davana in 1986, two characteristics of transforming leaders are courageous and value driven. Transforming leaders have the courage to confront reality, even if it is painful, and possess a healthy ego, meaning they do not rely on pleasing others to win their favor. This contrasts with leading to win popularity. A specific example of moral courage in leadership is the president of a senior council who chose to follow her school's alcohol policy and prohibited alcohol on a spring break trip. Despite the unanimous vote in favor of it, the president's decision to uphold ethical standards, even in the face of popular opposition, exemplifies transformational leadership. Transformational leaders are also value driven, with a set of core values consistent with their actions. Leaders can inspire others to higher levels of morality through influence and by modeling behaviors that become standards for others to follow.
Modeling a moral purpose. According to social learning theory, participants in organizations are more likely to imitate the behaviors of admired leaders. It is emphasized that the importance of role models and how people learn through observation and secondhand experiences. Here I just have like a short graphic of like what learning theory is. Um, For instance, when a football coach benched an essential star player for violating NCAA rules, It set a clear message about accountability, reinforcing ethical behavior among teammates. Similarly, Ben and Jerry's ice cream exemplifies socially responsible behavior by donating a portion of its profits to charitable causes, inspiring other businesses to follow suit. Furthermore, members can motivate leaders to behave ethically. For example, students at a food co-op urge their manager to consider empathy when deciding whether to dismiss an employee who had missed work to care for his ailing grandmother. And can anyone think of any other examples where members can encourage a leader to act ethically, where they may want to act unethically just to save their business in some way? If not, that's okay. But oh yes, yes, Camille.
Well, someone may be having a hard time financially, personally, in their
Yeah,
personal life, they don't have money, and maybe they're responsible for money in, you know, in some kind of way in their organization. The fact that they need the money, you know, to live, to buy something to eat, to travel, or whatever, does not mean that they should take that money that they are responsible for to handle their personal situation. I don't know if that's something that you would consider a good example.
yeah. I think that's a good example and a good point you brought up. Thank you. In short, the actions of both leaders and participants have a significant impact on the ethical climate in organizations. Engaging in ethical dilemma discuss Engaging in ethical dilemma discussions fosters a collaborative approach to ethical decision making, ultimately promoting a culture of integrity. Moral talk. Moral talk refers to discussions about ethical or moral issues in organizational settings that encourage participants to investigate the complex nature of dilemmas they face. Moral discussion fosters a more in-depth understanding of ethical issues. Birds and Waters 1989 emphasizes the importance of collaborative leadership, which involves leaders initiating discussions about ethics and individual interests. For example, a student president of an honor society may include a discussion about the consequences of keeping stolen exam files, promoting a debate about whether such actions are consistent with the organization's values of academic excellence and integrity. Another example of this is when a student government member used the game Scrapples, which is where you have an assigned answer card and a deck of dilemma cards. You read your dilemma card out and then choose the player whose opinion you think will match the answer card you hold. The game was used during a retreat to demonstrate practical moral talk and facilitated discussions about a variety of ethical dilemmas. Participants were able to reflect on their discussions and think about how to address other complex issues on campus. Unfortunately, many people avoid discussing moral issues, which is referred to as moral muteness. This reluctance stems from a number of factors, including the complexities of moral issues, the desire to preserve how others may perceive them, and how to avoid to avoid conflict with opposing ideological viewpoints. The absence of ethical discourse can lead to a disregard for moral considerations and even potential abuse. To combat moral muteness, leaders and members can actively engage in moral discussions, and such discussions can connect with a person's experiences and expectations, influencing their views on policies and decisions.
Ethical decision making model. The leadership process frequently involves ethical dilemmas and problems that lack clear solutions. Both leaders and participants must confront and resolve these dilemmas. Addressing ethical behavior is a shared responsibility, not solely that of the leader. According to the relational According to the relational leadership model, leadership should be inclusive and focused on processes that benefit the common good. This suggests that both leaders and group members should be involved in resolving ethical dilemmas. Together, they must be challenging, caring, purposeful, and consultative when addressing ethical issues. Ethics, like leadership, is not a simple concept. There are various approaches to resolving ethical dilemmas. In some cases, a professional code of conduct might be the most appropriate guide. For instance, lawyers and doctors adhere to codes of conduct upheld by their professional associations. Similarly, religious and counseling professionals follow strict confidentiality rules, except when there is a risk of harm to the client or others. Many organizations, including campuses, have policies, such as those on sexual harassment and non discrimination, that guides behavior. Greek organizations often rely on rituals that reflect their organizational standards and values. Additionally, students might follow honor codes, and student governments typically adhere to constitutions and bylaws to make decisions about funding and student organizations. Not all ethical issues can be resolved through the application of professional codes or organizational standards. Bucamp and Childress, 1979, Kitchener, 1984. Human judgment is required to determine whether a situation is, in fact, an ethical dilemma or simply a personality conflict between two individuals. While various models can guide ethical decision making, the models presented below are practical tools for resolving ethical dilemmas. Leaders and participants should use these models together, applying careful analysis rather than rigidly following any one model. Reflection and consideration of various factors are necessary. These models encourage the use of moral imagination, the ability to envision new alternatives to existing or unresolved problems. Without such imagination, these frameworks cannot stand on their own. Practical application. Imagine this scenario. You attend a college that has a strict academic honor code, calling for community members to turn in anyone who violates the code. You are also the president of the Interfraternity Council. During an examination, you notice a fraternity brother who is also one of your best friends cheating from another classmate. How do you go about confronting this situation? Do you A, follow the code and turn your fraternity brother into the judicial office, or do you try after the exam to persuade him to not cheat in the future because you will have to turn him in and it will look bad for your fraternity? You guys can say which one you will choose.
I think I might have to turn different then, not gonna lie. because it's been communicated, and it's a strict academic policy in the college that's well known. So you really so like you really have to follow it like to a T. And no way, and if the friend would to just continue would to just say, oh well, I'm going to cheat in this thing, and I know that it's wrong, and I know that I could get caught. They already expect to get caught, so why not just bring them expectations to reality? Because yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Next slide, please. When faced with a decision, do you immediately act or you start a thoughtful decision-making process, considering how your actions will impact others? Ethical decision-making models encourage taking time to work through dilemmas with a moral purpose, rather than reacting impulsively. These models provide frameworks to guide you in the making making sound decisions based on ethical analysis. According to Kither, 1995, tough decisions involve right versus right situations with where two equally important values conflict. They are genuine dilemmas precisely because each side of the problem is rooted in core values. This differs from right versus wrong situations, which are more about resisting moral temptations. In such dilemmas, it's crucial to think critically and act in alignment with your values, rather than doing nothing or acting without moral purpose. Kidder, 2005, provides a framework for examining right versus right choices using a four-dilemma paradigm model. Number one, justice versus mercy. Fairness and equity conflict with compassion, empathy, and love. Number two, short term versus long term. Immediate needs run counter to future goals. Number three, individual versus community. Self versus others, or small group versus larger groups. Number four, truth versus loyalty. Honesty competes with commitment, responsibility, or promise keeping.
Ethical principles and standards. In the helping professions, ethical principles adapted from Aristotle provide critical guidelines for practitioners such as physicians, psychologists, and counselors. Beauchamp and Childress, 1979, proposed five key principles of biomedical ethics, which were later applied to counseling psychology. The principles are respecting anatomy, allowing individuals to make their own decisions and develop their values, doing no harm, non-maleficence, which means ensuring that one's actions do not cause physical or psychological harm to others, benefiting others, beneficence, which means putting the interests of the organization or community first over personal gain, being just, which entails ensuring fair and equitable treatment for all individuals, and being faithful, fidelity, which means keeping promises and maintaining trust in relationships. These principles establish a framework for ethical decision making. And for example, if the chair of a homecoming community discovers an offensive t-shirt that may harm ethnic groups, the principles of anatomy must be balanced against the potential harm. Professional codes of ethics support ethical decision making in a variety of fields. The Center for the Study of Ethics in the Professions has collected over 850 codes that can protect professionals from unethical pressures while also promoting shared values. The newspaper test, which encourages people to consider whether they would be comfortable having their decisions scrutinized in public, is a useful decision-making tool. While ethical models can help with decision-making, They cannot replace the creativity and moral insight required to effectively address complicated circumstances.
In conclusion, leading with integrity is a complex process that involves the moral development of an individual, the influence of role models, value driven leadership, and the organizational environment. The process of developing into an ethical participant and creating ethical environments does not occur overnight. Groups and organizations are made up of humans that make mistakes, which is a part of the learning process. It is important to raise questions about ethical issues when leading with integrity. Often, leaders with moral purpose have as many questions as answers. Leading from the relational leadership model means leading with moral purpose, empowering and encouraging others to lead by example, involving other participants in resolving ethical dilemmas, acting ethically to positively affect the public good, and using a process to approach problems that do not offer clear solutions. Our society needs leaders and participants who can be trusted and are committed to doing the right thing. Despite the chaotic nature of our world, leading with moral purpose is vital to the leadership process. Think about what the world would look like if everyone strived to create and sustain an ethical environment by rewarding ethical acts and engaging in moral talk. Carefully working as a group towards resolving dilemmas using decision-making models. Okay, so now we just have some follow-up questions. Um, the first one is, what were your biggest takeaways from this presentation? So you could either type in the chat or put on your mics and say something. Um, Besides Akila and Camille, other people could answer as well, because I feel like for the majority of the presentation, they have been contributing and I haven't really heard anybody else.
Right. Well, if there are no responses to the questions, maybe we could just wrap it up.
Sounds good, sir.
Okay, then thank you everyone for listening to our presentation.